Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Detzel, and I am Reltio's Community Program Manager. Today, we have a webinar called MDM for the Masses, How to Get Started for Free. Special guest Guy Vorster is Principal Solution Consultant here at Reltio that will go through the presentation on how to use Identity 360 for free. So we're certainly excited to share that with you today. And Guy, if you can go to the next slide. So before we get started, I just want to talk to everyone a little bit about Reltio's new online community. So we will have a live online community on April 28th. Really, the goal is for our customers, partners, and people that are just looking at master data management in general and want to talk to their peers or experts within Reltio, and also other experts that use the products to connect. We are looking for folks to contribute, so you can email communitymanager@reltio.com if you want to contribute early. Please send an email directly to there, and that's how you can kind of get started there. So I'm certainly excited about getting that going pretty quickly. It's only a couple of months away. If you want to go to the next slide, Guy. Just a couple of things. I'm going to ask that all questions go into either chat or the Q&A. I will ask Guy those questions after the presentation. So feel free to ask as many as you like, and we'll get to as many of those questions as possible. We will record, and this demo is being recorded today, and so we will post that on our YouTube channel and probably some other places on our main website at Reltio. So that's all I have for me. I'm going to give it over to Guy.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. Hello, everybody. Guy Vorster. You'll be hearing from me for the rest of the session. We're actually going to spend the bulk of today's session in live software and hoping to give everyone a run through from end to end in terms of how the Reltio Identity 360 solution works. But before I do that, I'm going to spend just a couple of minutes and talk about a couple of the reasons why the solution actually exists. And I'd like to start here, and that is, I think as soon as the second record arrived in the very first database way back in the 70s, we were in trouble. And if you fast forward to today, we face a really daunting challenge when it comes to our data. And that is, typical organization has hundreds of applications in which the same or very similar pieces of information exist. If you look at a tiny example that we have up on the screen here, whether it be a digital and mobile channel or a marketing channel or a client telling a sales channel or customer service, our information just keeps getting replicated over lots and lots of different systems. And as the customers ourselves, this is a terrible customer experience for us. And we've all experienced being shuffled from one department to another in large organizations, only to have to provide the same piece of information again and again and again, trying to just get simple things done. So what we want in life, both as practitioners trying to solve this problem and as consumers on the other end of the problem, is this very single, consistent view of who we are as a person. I don't really care how many different applications or databases some company puts my information in the background. What I care about is that when I engage either through the call center or the website, or I walk into a store, whatever it may be, that this company understands who I am as an individual, understands all of my relationships in the context of me doing business with them, and also understands how I interact and transact and so on with this organization. I expect, and we all expect this, just as table stakes capabilities. Unfortunately, though, this is obviously a problem that has not yet been solved, because we experience this as customers every single day when we're trying to do business out there. So it's a very old problem. Why has it not been solved? Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. The first one is, in the past, it was very expensive to try and take on these kinds of problems. It often took multiple years for large companies to try and solve these problems with solutions that were very, very hard to implement. And so they were the purview not only of very large organizations, but also environments or platforms that could only be implemented by IT folks. And as a result, in the past, most companies have really struggled trying to solve this particular problem. And this is where Reltio Identity 360 comes in. And this is your free entry into the world of master data management. This ability to be able to reconcile information across lots of disparate data sources, applications, databases out there, and produce this single consistent view that can be shared in both an operational context, in other words, in real time as business is running, as well as for analytical purposes, in other words, for reports and so on. So in order to get into this world and start trying some of these capabilities out, we have launched the Reltio Identity 360. And as I said at the start, and as Chris said, this is a totally free entry into the world of master data management. So very simply, there's 3 steps to get you going. The first is you obviously need to register. So if you go to reltio.com/Reltio Identity 360 free tier request, you see this little screen, fill in some basic information, accept the terms and conditions, and you're almost ready to go. What will happen next is you'll get a verification email. And I would encourage you, if you have signed up and you haven't seen that verification email come through, please check your spam, because we've had some customers reach out to us, and that's been the reason that they didn't receive their verification email. Once you've verified your email, you're literally ready to go. And at this point, you'll get a welcome email, look exactly like this, welcome to Reltio Identity 360, and you'll have a URL that you can click on. This is the beauty, obviously, of software as a service capabilities. And what you'll start leveraging is your free slice of what we call the Reltio Connected Data Platform. So this is a new thing that I've just introduced. So what is this concept of the Reltio Connected Data Platform, and how does Identity 360, your free solution, fit into this particular picture? So Identity 360, as you can see, I've highlighted it up at the top on the left, is one of the products that Reltio provides. This one happens to be free, but it sits on this powerful platform that we've created that we call the Reltio Connected Data Platform. For starters, it's a cloud-native master data management solution, and it's built with 2 guiding principles in mind. The first being ease of use, and the second being extreme flexibility. And because it's a cloud-native solution, what that means is this environment is ready to go on day 1. Literally, if you sign up while I'm going through this webinar, you'll be in the solution before I'm even finished the webinar. So it's available on day 1, pre-configured, ready to go. Because it's in the cloud, it means we can continually upgrade this environment. We correct bugs all the time. We release new capabilities into the environment. And again, because it's native in the cloud, what it means is this overall platform is built for massive scale. And we have customers out there that are managing billions of records within this platform. But the second part of it, more importantly, is around the master data management, or the master 360 capabilities. Again, in the past, these types of capabilities were the realm of legacy solutions that were very difficult to implement. What we've done is significantly simplified this process. So now, as you ingest information into your Reltio Identity 360 or any of the other products that we provide, all of these mastering capabilities are enabled by default. In other words, entity resolution being foremost around trying to identify, do I have the same piece of information, whether that be within a particular database or file or across applications. Let's leverage some rules or even some machine learning capabilities to be able to help us stitch together this information. Let's apply rules to the data to be able to enrich it through data quality. For example, think of things like address standardization, geolocation, validation of emails and patterns are correct, and phone numbers and so on. And because we have scenarios where the same piece of information can exist in lots of different applications, we have to have some rules capabilities to be able to figure out what is the best piece of information when I bring disparate or different data sets together. That's known in this world as survivorship. And you can sort of look across toward the right, and there's a host of other capabilities, and this is certainly not exhaustive. There's a lot more capabilities, but there's some core ones that you just have to be able to do when you're thinking about this ability to bring information together and produce these connected views. And then lastly, the platform itself is, in this world, is known as a multi-domain platform. And in other words, what that means is the ability to manage information about lots of different subject areas. So Reltio Identity 360 itself is just focused on person data, but the ability to manage organizations and suppliers and products and assets and so on and so on and so on is built into this platform right as a foundational capability with a very flexible data model. So as you enjoy the Reltio Identity 360 solution, just know that under the covers is an extremely powerful platform that's actually serving up these capabilities. So at this point, I'm going to jump into the software, and we're going to spend the rest of the time in the Reltio Identity 360 solution. So give me 2 seconds just to switch my screen, and then we'll be into Reltio Identity 360. All right, hopefully you can see my screen. What you're looking at the moment is when you first log into your instance of Reltio Identity 360, you should see this screen that I am on now. The little splash page that I have up in front of me right now is something that you can leverage right at the start just to be able to quickly try and figure out what to do, where to do it, and so on. So if you click on this little product tour here, you'll see a little video by yours truly introducing a few of the concepts. This getting started with Identity 360 piece will get you into the documentation, which is all online. You can learn a little bit more about the solution and how it works and so on. And then down here at the bottom, you'll notice first steps such as explore some of the sample data, which will already have been loaded, and importing data, how do you export data, et cetera, et cetera. So this window won't necessarily always be there when you log in. And if it ever disappears, like I'm doing now, if you ever want to get it back, if you come down to the bottom and you notice my cursor circling around the big blue question mark on the bottom right side, this is where that screen hides. So if you click on that, here's the quick start page, and it'll bring us back to this particular spot, just so you know. All right, so where I've started within the Reltio Identity 360 is the dashboard page. And you can think of this dashboard page as the means to be able to get some pretty high-level information, but from a couple of different perspectives for an end user. And we'll explore all the different areas within the application here in a second. But starting with the dashboard environment, what I can see straight away is just some statistics in terms of how I've been using this particular environment. So notice over the last 7 days, I've loaded in 10,000 records, I've updated 145, et cetera, et cetera. So a very simple little view, but just trying to give me some information about what's been going on, how is information been moving through the life cycle within this environment. And the way that these kinds of environments typically work is you bring information to them. So in other words, I load data in from various sources. As that information is getting loaded into the platform, it's getting cleansed and standardized, for example, address cleansing and so on. It's going through a deduplication process, some of it being automated, some of it queued up for a person to review. And it sort of goes through these series of life cycle steps. And essentially, this little profile stats page or view gives us that visibility into what's going on. But as I scroll down, what you'll start seeing are a couple of different visualizations. And we've enabled a few here. And what we're trying to do here is really just simplify the view for someone wanting to quickly get a sense of what's going on in the data. And you'll notice some heat maps, some bubble charts, some bar charts, where a little facet is empty. It means we don't have any data loaded into this particular attribute, and so on. So all of these charts here are live in the environment. So in other words, what that means is, if I just hover over this, what this is telling me is there's 5 individuals with invalid email addresses in the state of Illinois. And if I come down a little further, for example, I've got 1,994 verified addresses, 14 unverified addresses. I've got 2,000 records loaded in from the Microsoft Dynamics source, 1,996 from the cleanser, which does addresses and phones and so on, 22 records from ServiceNow, and so on and so on. So simple visualizations. We can create as many or as few of these as we want, but they act as a little shortcut for an end user wanting to dive directly into the data. And I'll show everyone how that works here in a second. But before I do that, I want to scroll back up, and I would like everyone just to cast their attention on the top right side of the screen. And this is where we have what we call the activity log. I'm just going to open this little screen up, and if you ever want to do that, just click on the little search or export magnifying glass, and then you'll have a little opener that'll give you some more capabilities. So think of the activity log as, in a sense, the big brother within Reltio. It's watching everything that's going on in your particular tenant or instance or logical slice of the overall platform. And every single activity or action is logged within this environment. From me as a user logging in, what did I search for? What did I click on? What did I do? And if I ever want to have a look at what's going on within the environment itself, if you notice this little drop down, there's a whole bunch of different types of actions here. As I scroll down, you'll see a bunch of different types of actions that a user can perform. So for example, if I come down to, let's have a look for manual merge operations. In other words, where a user has said within the user interface, hey, these two things are the same based on specific rules and so on. I can do that search. I'm presented now with a list down here, which if I want, I can export this for reporting purposes. Alternatively, I can actually click on these. These are all live links taking me to those individual records, which we happen to call profiles within the Reltio environment. So activity log is always on. It's not something you ever have to switch on or switch off. It's always there. It's always ensuring from a compliance perspective, if you ever have a scenario of how did this record change over time? What did it first look like when it came in? Show me all the changes and who changed it, when did it change, etc. All of those types of questions can now be answered. And I'll show everyone an even more detailed representation of this when we actually drill into an individual record here in a second. What I'd like to do now is come back to the visualizations themselves. And I mentioned a little minute ago that these are shortcuts into the data. So for example, if I as a user want to leverage this and go and look at these 5 records in Illinois of individuals with invalid email addresses, it's as simple as me just clicking on this. And what's happened now is the Reltio screen has shifted. We were in the dashboard tab at the top. If you can see my cursor scrolling or circling at the top. And we're now in the search section of the application. And what you'll notice here is an advanced search kind of tab is open, and it's showing me what I actually just did from the dashboard. And that was find me all those people where the address is, or the state is Illinois, and the validation status of the email is invalid. And that happens to be these 5 records here. So as an end user right now, there's a couple of things that I can do here. The first thing could be, I may decide to save this search for coming back to later, even though I can get to it from the dashboard. And if I want to save this kind of search condition that I've created here, I can simply just click on this little save button up at the top and call this my bad emails in Illinois. And I have a choice here of just saving this as a saved search just for me, or alternatively, if I click on all users, everyone who has access to my tenant, and obviously I can invite other people within my organization, all those folks would be able to use this particular saved search. In my case, I'm just going to save it for me right now. Now, the other thing is I can obviously adjust these searches. So right now, this is invalid emails in Illinois, but notice there's 5 records that have met this search condition. Because the environment is responsive and all the data is indexed, I can actually make very easy changes to my searches, and I'm going to spend some time in other ways of searching here in a second. But for example, if I just get rid of that condition right now and just show me those customers that have invalid emails, notice the number has changed to 24. Or alternatively, just find those in Massachusetts with invalid emails. Well, the number now is 3, and so on. So I can expand on this advanced search and conditions, or conditions, etc. So there's quite a lot you can do within this, as well as if I just come back here, you'll notice a bunch of operators that I can specify as part of my search. But I'm going to jump out of this. I'm not going to save that search. And so now I am in the generic search screen. I'm not looking for anything specific yet. So I want to introduce a couple of different ways that you can now also think about finding information. And so advanced search aside, and if you ever want to get back to it, it's this button up on the top left side. Hopefully you can see me sort of circling it right now. It'll open that window that I was just on. So let's talk about all the different ways that I can now find information. I can just type stuff in like we do with Google, which I'll show you in a second. I can use a faceted search capability, which we're very familiar with when we're shopping on Amazon, as an example. Or alternatively, I can also leverage a geographic-based search. And so let me zoom in a little bit, and then I'll show you what I mean in this case. So what I'm going to do is just change to display 100 records here on our map. It looks a little nicer. And one of the ways that we can now search is through the map itself on the right side. And the way, if you're ever within your Identity 360 solution and you're not sure how to get that map back, these controls up on the top right side that I'm sort of hovering over right now is where the map exists. And you'll see this is the map icon that I'm on now. So what I'm going to do real quick is leverage a little obscure button here to be able to draw an area. And I'm going to use this as my search. So let's say, for example, I want to do a search for all of our customers in the Northeast. And let me just quickly draw a little map around this, or a little polygon. And notice we went from our 2009 records, whatever we had in here, and the number has now dropped down to 573. And if I click on sort of the grouped area, you notice it'll keep sort of zooming me in and bringing me down to, in this scenario, the individual instances around Boston in this case. So that's one mechanism of being able to search, leveraging the map and literally just drawing some polygons on the map and using that as a search condition. The other way, as I mentioned, is literally treating Reltio like we do with Google. And you notice the nice little search bar up at the top here, and I can just start typing information in. And notice, as soon as I start typing, Reltio starts returning results. I'm not telling it where to look, what attribute to search on, just like we do with Google and even Amazon, etc. I'm just giving you some information. Please just figure out what exists and start returning some results. So the more that I give it, the more it'll narrow down to an individual record or a smaller list as possible based on what I'm giving it. So in this scenario, I typed in J Portland. It's found a person called J Harper. And if I just look at the address, which is displayed there, it's in Portland. So the way that Reltio has found this is it's looked across every attribute that is populated, because all the information is indexed. It's very easy for us to do this. This is capabilities that I, as a consumer or a user, just expect, because I use them in Google and Facebook and LinkedIn and so on and Amazon all day long. So the exact same capabilities. So just type some stuff in and off you go. Alternatively, I can be thinking about the facet search. So that's going to bring us to the left side of the screen here. And this is where we take a leaf out of our experience with Amazon. And that is, let's use checkboxes to be able to filter our data down. So when I click on the individual entity, and that's the only type of data that Identity 360 manages right now, data about people, what you'll notice is a few attributes will appear down the left side here. These are just attributes that are out of the box, set up to display themselves down this left side. So what I can do is I can filter within these. Alternatively, I can add more attribute views or attributes into this list. For example, if I just click on here, notice this particular screen opens up, and there's a series of attributes that are recommended. Notice these in this top group. These are ones that people tend to switch on and leverage quite often for this kind of information. So we'll come back and switch some of those on. But as I scroll down, the ones obviously with the blue check boxes are ones that are switched on already. The ones that are not checked are not enabled. But as I scroll down, I can enable any of these to be able to search on. And obviously, if I have data in these attributes, then I can leverage them in my search. If there's no data, I've just got an empty little box and I can't really do much with it. So as you think about populating your instance of Reltio Identity 360, any attribute that has data in it, we can enable it for visualization here in the facet search. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to enable a couple of visualizations. I'm going to switch on some of these recommended ones, potential matches, the sources view, and our match rules view. So the sources view is my shortcut into being able to filter my data by source. Think of a source in the terms of Reltio as an application or a database or a spreadsheet or something that has been loaded into Reltio itself. Match rules are essentially the out-of-the-box rules that are being configured to identify duplicates. And so I'll be able to, if I want, filter on a specific rule such as show me all those cases where you found similar names but the same email as an example. That's what match rules are. And then potential matches is a little chart that I can quickly leverage to say, find me those profiles or those records that have more than or up to a certain number of matches or potential duplicates. So I just switched those on, and now they've made their way into the view that you see here. So this is now, in the same manner that we think about Amazon, this is how I can now filter my data down. So notice as soon as I click on this, I get a drop-down list of all the distinct values and how many records meet those particular conditions. So I can see there's 2,000 records from Dynamics, 22 from ServiceNow, etc. So straight away I could say, well, let's filter down. Just show me those records that came from ServiceNow. And with a single click of a button, I go from 2,000 plus records down to 22 profiles. And all the other corresponding visualizations, I'm not sure if you noticed that, but they update themselves too as soon as I make a change. So I'm going to disable this for a second, but if you looked on the map on the right, and I'm not sure if you noticed this visualization of potential matches, but they both changed when I updated this particular setting here. So let me switch this off. Notice the map changed because we've sort of zoomed out some more records, and our little graphic here on potential matches changed. So let me go back and switch on. Just show me those records from the ServiceNow source that I loaded in. There's 22 records. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to narrow my focus even more and look at those records that have some potential duplication in my data set. And that's where this particular visualization down here comes into play. So this is telling me that there's 18 records with 0 or 1 potential duplicates. There's 3 records with 1 or 2, and then there's 1 record that has 2 duplicates associated with it. So I can either switch on or off these little bar charts here, or alternatively, I can just use the slider. Notice straight away, I'm now adding another condition into the data, or into my search. I've said, find me those individuals between 1 and 2 potential matches from this particular data source. And if I notch this up even further, we're down to a single person who has 2 potential duplicates associated to it. So again, this concept within the Reltio Identity 360 of being able to reconcile information through matching rules is really what is at play here. And that's what allows me to be able to leverage some of this information within the search experience itself. And if I, for any reason, wanted to export this data, and then I'll jump into the profile view after this, but let's just say, for example, I've got these 22 records, and I want to be able to export these out because I want to go and say to someone, hey, here's the information from ServiceNow that potentially has some duplicates, whatever it may be. I can literally just come to this little export button here, and I can click on it, and it'll open up a new window, which is the Reltio export console. And in this scenario, it said you've got 22 profiles. Here's my search criteria that I just had in the main screen. And now I can decide what is it that I want to export, all the attributes, etc. And I can just walk through a little wizard, and I'll be able to export this information. So anything within the Reltio environment itself is exportable. If you've brought it in here, you can get it out of here really easily. But let's go back to our data stewardship activity real quick, and that is, let's narrow our list down. Show me those records that have the most duplicates. In this case, it happens to be this one instance of a person known as L. Lowery. So what I can do now is click on this particular profile. And what you're looking at now is what we call the profile view in Reltio. In other words, this is where we think of the 360-degree view that's being constructed as information is flowing into the platform itself. So starting on the top side here on the left is a series of attributes that are populated right now. And the thing to note about Reltio is there's no such notion of nulls like we typically have in relational architectures. There are no blank values. If an attribute doesn't have a value, it just doesn't exist in Reltio. So as you think about bringing your information and loading data into Reltio, don't be surprised where you may look at one profile and it may be very well populated, and another profile may not have a lot there because those attribute values don't actually exist. So one thing I'll start pointing out is if you look at first name, middle name, last name real quick, do you notice that there's a little +1 symbol next to the last name? So if I hover over this, notice another name pops up, Lowery, spelled slightly differently. So what's at play there is the rules engine of Reltio behind the scenes. And it's telling me as an end user, by the way, there's another value for this last name. I'm just not displaying it as your golden record because the rules that are in place right now are preventing me from displaying that as the golden record or as part of the golden record. And I'll show everyone in a second how we look at that in a little bit more detail. But this is part of the dynamic nature of how Reltio works from the perspective of as information comes together, we're dynamically building this view of what the golden record is. We're never throwing anything away. And this ability is paramount to the flexibility that Reltio offers behind the curtain. So if we now start looking over to the right side, there's some potential matches here, which we'll go and deal with separately here in a second. But I want to draw your attention just down to the bottom here in terms of these contact attributes real quick. You'll notice address, and if I expand address, you'll see a bunch of sub-attributes and so on. So the notion in Reltio is very simple when we think about the data model. Everything about a person is part of the person record. That whether that person has multiple names, multiple addresses, multiple phone numbers, it doesn't matter. Everything is part of this single record. This is just how we think about data in real life. Unfortunately, though, our relational database backgrounds in the past, we used to have to break information into very complex structures, but we don't have to do that anymore. And that's the beauty of what you're seeing here. So in other words, you're seeing attributes with attributes. And by the way, the fact that this is an address, it's automatically cleansed, standardized, verified, according to USPS postal standards, geocoded, etc. And similarly, if I look at email, in this scenario, we're looking at, is this email pattern valid? Let's break the email into sub-attributes, which in turn we could use as part of matching and so on. And then before I deal with the potential matches itself, I want to just ask everyone to cast their eyes over to the right side here and look at the audit trail. So right now, this is quite a simple audit trail, and you're going to see how this changes as we start taking some action in the data itself. So the very first entry, if I click on this, this is when this information first came into Reltio. So this was the 11th of February. At this time, this user, who was me, loaded this information into Reltio. And this is what it looked like at this point in time. Then an action occurred on the data. So if you look up one step, what you'll notice here, you'll see this concept called on the fly. That just means that there was a rule which is embedded in the platform that automatically detected something that was the same. And that rule resulted in this new record that we just added being automatically merged into an existing record. And notice when I click on this part of the audit trail, what you'll notice on the left side here is that's where this name, last name, got introduced. Here's where the multi-channel communication consent attributes got introduced. Address ended up merging, collapsing into itself, email getting updated, and we added, if you look at the bottom in green, this particular service ID as part of our identifiers. And that action resulted in the view or this profile that we now see. And as I said, what you'll start seeing as we start taking some action here as a steward to kind of clean up some of these duplicates, you'll see this audit trail change in a second. Before I do that though, I'm going to go to what we call the crosswalk view, because I want to give you a perspective of the sources that are behind the scenes. Because what you're seeing here on this particular profile screen is your golden record. And it's not really, at least at first glance, you may not know where this information came from, which sources supplied which pieces of information. The way to find that out is to come to this sources view, and you notice a couple of little icons on the left. I'm going to do this real quick, and then we'll come back and resolve this duplicate. So when I switch to the sources view, you'll start seeing a very kaleidoscopic view, and this view is going to change also as we start taking some action. But every single attribute that's populated is displayed here. So you'll notice first, middle, last, address, email, etc., etc. And if you look over on the right, what this is telling us right now is this particular record came from Microsoft Dynamics, and here's the identifier in Microsoft Dynamics. It came from our ServiceNow application. There's the identifier of the primary key, and it also came from the Reltio data cleanser. In other words, the address cleansing, phone, email cleanser, etc. So what we look at on the previous screen in terms of our profile view is actually a combination of data from these various sources. And so what you'll notice is this series of swim lanes and telling us how many attribute values exist in every one of these attributes. So there's two names or two values for the last name, middle name, etc. And if I hover over these, I can see obviously that this comes from ServiceNow because it's green and so on. If I expand address real quick, what you'll notice in the address is there's three source values, one from ServiceNow, one from Microsoft Dynamics, and one from the Reltio data cleanser. So the cleanser itself, and if I hover over this, just the attributes that that particular source provided are shown right now. So what this means is when we're cleansing information or standardizing information, we're actually never changing the underlying data from a particular source. And this is very important. Why? Because we want to maintain the an accurate audit trail of what did we get from this particular source, Microsoft Dynamics or ServiceNow, etc. If we were to change that data, then the audit trail no longer is accurate. So hence this concept of the cleanser acting as an additional source within the Identity 360, and it works like this across the entire Reltio platform. So you'll notice this if you're ever loading your own data in and there's addresses and phone numbers and emails, you'll notice this additional cleanser source that exists there, and that's exactly why it's there. So coming into the middle, you'll notice a series of rules across every attribute. These rules that you see here are the gatekeeper for what gets displayed on the left side here, which we call the operational values. If you have any familiarity with MDM at all, you would be thinking of this as your golden record. That's what exists in blue, and that's what we were looking at on the profile page a minute or so ago. I'm just going to open this drop-down up. I can't make any changes to this in the Reltio Identity 360, but if you do this and you see this drop-down, what you'll notice is there's a whole series of different types of rules that are actually available. And as you start leveraging more of the enterprise capabilities of Reltio, then obviously some of these capabilities get enabled and so on. But I'm not going to go through this list, but if you just have a quick look at it, you'll see that there's a bunch of different options that are available as you start thinking about this from more of an enterprise perspective. So what I'm going to do now is let's go and resolve the duplicates that were visible for us earlier. So I've clicked on what we call the potential matches view. You see the little two people side by side. This is where we can quickly resolve possible duplicates in the platform. So the thing to bear in mind is as data flows into Reltio, certain information is going to be automatically stitched together because maybe it's exactly the same based on the rules. And other information is going to be presented in these kinds of potential match views. And that is where we've decided as part of our configuration based on our experience that people should be making decisions in certain criteria. And that's what you're seeing here. So we've got a scenario where this record, which is a combination of data from ServiceNow and Dynamics and our cleanser, is a potential duplicate of data from our website record that we loaded in, as well as another potential duplicate in ServiceNow. So if I come up here, I can expand this particular view and see what rule or rules, it doesn't have to be a single rule only that fires in this scenario, but what rule is suggesting to us that these two records are the same. And this one happens to be a fuzzy match. So in other words, it'll take into account things like spelling errors and transposition and all those kinds of, fat finger kind of scenarios, and email. And I can look at this L. Lowry, different addresses, there's the email, and so on, right? So I've got two choices to make as a user right now. Do I believe this is correct? In other words, yes, you can merge these together, or no, this is not actually a match. And if I choose not a match, that decision sticks. In other words, Reltio is not going to come back to me tomorrow and say, hey, by the way, Guy, you want to look at this potential match. I've made this decision, and my decision is no, they're not a match. But in my case, I'm going to say, yes, this is actually the same. So I'm going to merge these two records together. So in other words, what were two now becomes one. And what you'll notice is as we do this, this profile will actually get a little fatter every time because new information is being added into the view. And so now this repeats because there were two duplicates in this case. So now I'm looking at, is this a possible duplicate in the ServiceNow application again? And in our case, matches on the name and street, et cetera, merge, not a match. I'm going to say, yep, I agree with you. Let's put these together, please. So again, the profile has got a little fatter. So now let's go back and look at what's actually happened. So I'm going to go back to the main. Hey, Chris.
Hey, just have a couple of questions for you, if you don't mind.
Oh, yeah, of course. Sorry, man. I've just been going for it.
No worries. No worries at all. So one of the questions Todd had, and if we're not going to do that, it's fine. Maybe we can do it some other time. But his question is, can we see the stewardship match review and how matches get created? So I load a new data source. How is that done? Does matching kick off automatically and then go through the workflow?
Yeah, great question. The short answer is yes, that happens automatically. And I'm going to show you, and I'm just cognizant of time, I'm going to show everyone how to get to the data loader and how to load a file, at which point matching and cleansing, and this is the beauty of it, is this stuff happens automatically. You don't have to cleanse data and then run matching and then run merging. Just give Reltio data, and it's going to do that on your behalf. And it's going to present it up in the UI like you just saw, and where a user can then make a decision and so on. Got it.
A few others.
Yeah, very good question. Yeah, let's spend a minute or two just hitting some of those, and then we'll continue on.
Great, appreciate that, Guy. I think some of these have been answered, so we can quickly go by it. But does it support AS400 data and Teradata? I think
short answer is Reltio supports any type of data. You just have to be able to convert it into a canonical model. So, for example, in Identity 360, we can load data in the form of CSV files, JSON documents, etc. So there's no limitation to what kind of source Reltio can support, because at the end of the day, I'm either giving Reltio data via an API in real time, or I'm giving it a batch file like a CSV file, JSON file, etc.
Great. Another question, Elizabeth has, it looks like Deanne answered a couple, but there's one that says, can the end user, sales rep, customer service, collections, etc., request changes or updates via a workflow? So for example, like a customer contact, payment terms change, delivery instructions.
Yeah, so workflow itself is part of the larger Reltio connected data platform. So in Identity 360, workflow is not enabled, unfortunately, but it certainly does become enabled as you go up into some of the more enterprise capabilities of Reltio.
Great. And last question. From the search screen, is there a way to change more than one profile at a time?
Very good question. So we have a batch update capability. However, I don't believe, and I'll have to check on this, so we may have to get back to everyone on this, but I don't believe that the batch update, so batch change capability, is enabled in Identity 360. I'll follow up on that and just double check, but I can't recall seeing it when I was poking around a little while ago. So I'll follow up on that one and double check. And if you know who asked that question, Chris, we can certainly get back to that person.
Absolutely. Thank you.
But it is a capability of the platform for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so let's continue on, and I'm cognizant of time, so I'm going to go a little quickly. So what I want everyone to look at real quick is we took some action in the data. We got rid of some duplication based on what we just did. Look at the audit trail on the right-hand side right now. So now it looks like, you know, a little bit of spaghetti that has formed here. So what this is showing me as an end user is that we started with data at the bottom here from our Microsoft Dynamics system. Remember, if I click on this, I'm looking back in time at what this record looked like. There was also data from our ServiceNow application. That's what this looked like. It was merged together automatically. So going back to that question earlier, when we loaded the data in, this just happened. Cleansing happened and match and merge just happened. That's how Reltio works. Then up here, let me go up there, we performed a manual. Notice it says manual because that's the action I took in the UI. We performed a manual merge. And this was the rule that recommended we take this action. When did it occur? Who did it? All part of the audit trail. Here's the changes that occurred to this profile as a result. We introduced a new name. We introduced education information. We introduced date of birth. Then we did another manual merge operation. We introduced yet another name, et cetera, et cetera. And that's how we ended up with this view that we have now. And we've got multiple addresses, multiple emails, a single phone number, multiple communication consent attribute values. Our survivorship rules are telling us, hey, by the way, you've got multiple names, but I'm only displaying one, and so on. So this information just coming together with full visibility as to who did it, when did it happen, what rules were used, etc. So what I'm going to do now, and then I'm going to move on to how do we load data and so on. I know we've only got a few minutes left. What happens if you make a mistake? And obviously, at any point as a user, I could say, oh boy, that wasn't actually the same person. How do I fix that? Well, you actually fix that very simply. So let's come back to our sources view. And let's say I decide, you know what? I made a huge mistake here. This website user is actually someone completely different. This is the son or whatever, right? Somehow I figured that out. So I can notice that this is coming from obviously this orange source, which is the website. And if you look up at the top at this little, I don't even know how to think of this, I guess like little octopus view with these lines, this happens to show me, here's the individual profile. So each of these little gray boxes you can think of as a record. Here's the individual profiles. In my case, I'm saying, okay, that's the one from the website. Let's pull this out. Let's unmerge this. Right. So in other words, what I'm asking Reltio to do is, hey, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Please get rid of this record. Pull it out. Make it no longer part of this group. So notice what just happened. My record re-rendered without that source. Because remember, these rules are our gatekeeper. So all that happened was these source values basically go through these rules again, and we get a new instance of our profile or our golden record. And if we come back to our audit trail, guess what? Audit trail has tracked us for us too. So notice we see the little diverging line now. That is where we pulled that record out. Notice when I click on that, it's showing me what it did. So all the red strikeouts are essentially what was removed from the record. Again, full visibility for me as an end user so that I understand what happened, when did it occur, what changes actually occurred to the data, etc. So some amazing capabilities in here. If you just think about the notion of trying to bring information together, make it easy, make it intuitive for someone to understand, even though I know I've been throwing a lot at folks, hopefully you can sort of see some of the power behind the scenes in terms of what you can do when you're trying to steward and bring this information together. So now, with a few minutes left, what I want to do is move over to how do you bring information into this platform? Because when you first log in, I think we've loaded like 100 records or something into everyone's tenants just so that you can sort of fiddle around with stuff. But really, you'll want to get rid of that. And the way that you do that is if you come to this more menu, I can just choose delete all my profiles, and a little background task will start, clean everything out, and then you can do your thing. And by the way, if you want to create individual records, you can just come here and click on create profile, new individual, and a little form will pop up, name, address, etc. Off you go. If you want to edit, and then I'll go to data loader. If I want to edit something, it's also very simple. Notice this little button here. I can either edit a record, it's in view mode right now, or I can delete it. So that's how you can delete something. But if I put something in edit mode, I could say, hey, the name is actually not Al, it's Alan. And I'm going to save that change, and off we go. The name is now Alan. All right, so now I'm going to spend a minute on data load. So if you want to bring your own files into the platform, the best way to do that, in fact, the only way right now, is you notice this little chocolate bar icon on the top right. Click on that, and it'll open up or give you these choices. Click on the console here. The console, think of this as an administrator's interface to Reltio. And these tiles, most of them will be disabled for Reltio Identity 360 users, but they give you a sense of some of the capabilities behind the curtain. Where you'll want to come to is Data Loader over here under Tenant Management. So if I click on Data Loader, it actually opens up this console. And in my case, I'm going to choose my tenant, which, because I have access to a whole bunch of different tenants, I'm just going to choose the right one. Now, this won't happen for you folks because you only have access to a single tenant. So I'm going to just choose the right one here. And then I'll show you how we continue on. Give me 1 second. All right.
And just quickly, Guy, we have about 5 minutes. So.
All right, perfect. I'm going to take 2 minutes and then we'll be done.
Perfect.
So I'm going to choose to load some data. So the first thing, as with most environments, when you want to load data is, hey, let's go and grab a file. So I'm going to grab a file quickly, and let's just say that's our website data. I'm going to choose continue, and it's going to walk me through a little wizard. And for most folks, you won't have any mappings available the first time you do a data load. Think of a mapping just as a little bit of metadata that's created that ties your particular column names in your file, like your Excel file, to the Reltio data model. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose a mapping so that I don't have to go and individually map all of these attributes. But essentially, what you'll do is you'll notice ID, first name, last name, date of birth, etc. Right? These are the column names in my file. And then the blue values that you see on top are tied to the Reltio data model. So for example, if I open this up, let's get rid of city just real quick. I can just go and to address and say city should go there. Click on it, connect it in, and there we go. I've mapped city to city. So essentially you go through this little mapping exercise. You only have to do this once. Once you create that map, you can reuse it if you bring those files in. I can save my little mapping and then continue on and so on. So one thing I want to do just real quick is I want to just talk about this notion of crosswalks, and then I'm going to end here at least on the mapping. Crosswalks are very important, but this may be a strange concept to folks if you're not used to some of the terms that are used. Think of a crosswalk. It's a very important piece when you're loading information into Reltio. This is telling us what is the source system. In this case, there's just a default list that you can choose from, but it's just a piece of metadata. What is the source system, and which attribute in your file maps to that value? So notice here, we've got the crosswalks value displayed here. So that's really how we're telling Reltio when we're going to load this data. Hey, by the way, the primary key on my file is this ID column. And then per the question earlier, you load data in. So I go through my little mapping exercise, call it something, and now I'm either going to save it as a draft or I'm going to load my data. And then if I click load, off it goes, and it schedules the job as a background job. But when that's happening, basically, as the data flows into Reltio per the question earlier, cleansing is going to happen, addresses, emails, those kinds of things. Matching will occur automatically, as will merging. In other words, those records that match up on the automated rules. Same exact name and address and phone and all those types of things. So there you have it. I know we've covered a lot and I went quite fast, but there's still so many things, folks, that I haven't touched on. But that's about as far as we'll go today. And I know we've only got 2 or 3 minutes left. So I'll just switch back to the slides here for a second, and we certainly can pause and take some questions. But everything that you see here, from dashboard view to activity log to searching to manually merging, unmerging, etc., we saw. The only thing that I didn't touch on is what happens when you click upgrade within the UI. Well, very simply, you click upgrade, an email notification gets sent to some folks at Reltio, and they'll schedule a discussion with you to try and understand your needs a little bit more to figure out what tier you could potentially fall into. So that being said, I'll stop here and take some questions. I'm happy to stay on a little longer if anyone has some time to stay on. But Chris, over to you. Let's see if there's any other questions.
Yeah, thanks, Guy. That was a very in-depth webinar. Certainly appreciate it. And I don't see any questions as of now, but if you do have additional questions, feel free to email communitymanager@reltio.com. Also, if you're interested in contributing in the online community, that will be live on April 28th. Please email that as well. And so hopefully this was valuable. We'll do some more of these. And from there, let's see, it is actually time. So thank you so much, Guy. And thank you for those that came today.
You're welcome.
Really do appreciate it.
Thanks for the questions, folks, and thanks for attending.